Welcome to our Timely Topics webinar on the important issue of climate change. I'm Diana Wynn, President of the League of Women Voters of Wake County. Before we begin, I have just a few announcements regarding some of our other League activities and events. Early voting in North Carolina started today and will continue through October 31st, through the end of the month. League members continue their work to promote voter turnout and to educate voters about the election process. The League of Women Voters operates vote411.org as a separate platform from our regular website. Vote 411 is dedicated to nonpartisan election information. It's where you'll find our online candidate guides for the races at the national, state, and the local level. It's also a great resource for all sorts of election information in North Carolina. Vote 411 won a national Webby Award earlier this year, which is essentially the equivalent of the Oscars for digital platforms. This week, we began advertising Vote 411 on WRAL Mix 101 radio, so listen for us there. We encourage you to check out vote411.org and help us spread the word about this useful, nonpartisan election resource. And if you haven't already done so, go out and vote. We have some members only events coming up that may interest many of our league members. Next week, we will host our first virtual field trip for members, and we'll be going to the J.C. Ralston Arboretum virtually. Later this month, we will offer a session of League 101 to our newer members. This is an interactive online orientation to the league. And next month, our League Lit book group will be discussing the book My Southern Journey. League Lit sessions are open to any member of the Wake League, even if you haven't finished reading the book. And next month, we will also have an online social event for League members that will feature a conversation with Jedediah Gant, who is doing a book on graffiti art in Raleigh. Our next Timely Topics webinar will be November 19th. All of our Timely Topics webinars are open to the public, and next month's will be about affordable housing. You can find more information about our activities and our events at lwvwake.org. Before we begin, I want to briefly explain how we are using the Zoom platform for this webinar. Except for the presenters, everyone is muted and you're not on video. We're not using the chat feature in Zoom. Instead, please type your questions in the Q&A screen. If you hover your computer mouse, probably near the center bottom of your Zoom screen, a menu should appear. You should then be able to click on the Q&A option. One of our moderators will be monitoring the Q&A screen throughout the presentations. At the end of the presentations, the speakers will be asked your questions. We'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can, but please don't wait until the end of the presentation to submit your questions. Cheryl Keaton, our Timely Topics Committee co-chair, will monitor the questions submitted and will serve as our moderator for the Q&A segment. This webinar is being recorded and in the next few days will also appear on LWV Wake's YouTube channel. I'd now like to turn the program over to our other Timely Topics Committee co-chair, Diane Payen, who will introduce the speaker.
Hi, everyone. I'm Diane Payen, and I'm one of the co-chairs, and I have one update on tonight's webinar. We found out just this morning that Dr. Kathy Dello from the State Climate Office of North Carolina had an emergency dental procedure, and she's unable to be with us. However, a colleague from the Climate Office graciously agreed to be with us on short notice. So thank you to Mr. Cam Bailey, who will be joining us with Isa Deering. And we're happy to have him and Isa. Thank you. I'd like to ask a favor of our audience before I introduce them. Make note of that Q&A feature that Diana mentioned, because we have two accomplished speakers and they have a commonality of goal and purpose in the social implications of climate change. So please send your questions and let's have a very lively discussion tonight. Thank you. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our first guest. Cam Bailey currently works for the North Carolina State Climate Office, where he helps to develop educational content, monitors real-time weather data across the state, and maintains the EcoNet, Environment and Climate Observing Network weather stations. Before he joined the State Climate Office this past February, Cam was a high school earth science teacher in Northern Virginia, where he worked primarily with ESL students. In addition to teaching, he designed, developed, and delivered earth and environmental science curriculum, as well as teacher professional development seminars. Cam is currently enrolled and working towards a master's degree in climate change and society at NC State University. He plans to use his experiences and connections on efforts in the future for intersectional climate justice, communication, and policy. Our second guest tonight is Isa Deering. Isa was born and raised in Durham, and she graduated from J.D. Clement Early College High School in North Carolina Central University. While there, she worked with the Youth Justice Project, the East Durham Children's Initiative, and Made in Durham's Youth Network. She also co-founded the Durham Youth Climate Justice Initiative, which works to set an intentional space for young people of color in climate action. And she serves and continues to serve as the Environmental Justice Coordinator for Trees Durham and as the Environmental Policy Advisor for Angeli Boyd's Durham Soil and Water Supervisor campaign. Currently, Ms. Deering is a first-year student at Howard University. She's studying history and environmental studies with a minor in geography, and her goal is to become a climate scientist and to contribute to sustainable community development. So as you can see, we're fortunate to have both guests tonight. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Cam Bailey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diana, for that wonderful introduction. I'm extremely honored to be here tonight as part of tonight's discussion, and really thrilled to hear from Isa. So I'm going to keep my comments brief. And as you can probably tell, I am not Dr. Kathy Dello, but tonight I'm going to do my best to tell you a little bit about what we do at North Carolina's State Climate Office. I am going to mention throughout a few links and resources, but those will be shared later on if you're interested. So a little bit about our office to start. Our office focuses on research and outreach that enhances our capabilities to educate the public about complex topics like climate change, very complex, and climate variability, El Nino, La Nina, and the effects on North Carolina's weather and climate, and things like that that the public might be interested in. We also provide public services and tools regarding how some of these events impact North Carolina's agriculture, water resources, air quality, disaster mitigation, and I'll mention a few of those later on in the talk. So again, our main goal is to provide the most accurate climate information to North Carolina's citizens and to reach people where they are, however we can do that. Now, generally speaking, that means physically going out to places in the community and schools. I think we're all aware, just based on what we're looking at right now, that hasn't been quite as possible recently, but we are working back towards that to see how we can do that safely. We're also there to reach people where they are in their current understanding of climate. So whether it's elementary school level, all the way through undergraduate and even some graduate level content that we put out there. A great example of this is the North Carolina Climate Science Report, of which Dr. Kathy Dello was an author and was on the Climate Science Advisory Panel. But we also had others in our office that provided technical contributions. So we had a lot of hands in that product. This report really heavily contributed to the climate risk assessment and resilience plan that was directed by Executive Order 80. And I saw that was part of the materials that were mentioned prior to the webinar. So I highly recommend taking a look at that if you're not familiar. But basically, this resilience plan was the most comprehensive effort to date. And these efforts are going to continue into the future and become more robust as time goes on, the more we learn. I highly encourage everyone, if you're interested, to take a look at that paper. And while the paper in its entirety is just shy of 400 pages, there's a summary of the key findings, and yeah, the key findings, that's only about 30 pages. So it saves you some reading, but if you are interested, it definitely blossoms into more detail. On a more regular basis, additionally, we're doing things like Diane had mentioned, we collect and monitor weather and climate data using our own statewide weather stations. My heart's into that a little bit because I look at the data directly and maintain some of those weather stations. It's a lot of fun, but it provides a lot of very important information. We're also working with other data sets. We're going to talk a little bit later about COCORAS, which is the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. And actually someone in our office, Darian Bertrand, is the state coordinator for that program, this community science effort. If you'd like to contribute, I'm going to tell you a little bit later on how you can do that. There's a lot of opportunity in community science. But again, I'll discuss that here in a few minutes. We also often work with and support state agencies and organizations. There are many people in our office that work to design different tools, different resources that are useful to the people and also the organizations within North Carolina. A couple of examples of these are, there's a fire weather tool that we have developed and provided that is pretty much what it sounds like. A lot of people don't think of North Carolina as being particularly vulnerable to wildfires, but they do happen, and we need to know when there's a good chance of that happening based on drought and plenty of other factors. But we have developed a tool for agriculture especially to use. We also have things like monthly blog posts that wrap up and contextualize the previous month. I think we're going to share the link to the most recent blog post, September. Very interesting, and every month I'm learning new things from these blog posts. We also assist other scientists and educators by integrating climate information into other applications, agriculture, urban heat islands, things like that. Because the more we learn about climate, the more we realize that it's intersectional and it really touches on everything. So we're there to support those efforts. We're also actively pursuing a wide range of research and outreach activities so we can improve the understanding of the complex interactions between North Carolina weather and climate and the environment. So we're always growing. For example, Diane, again, that incredible introduction, mentioned that I'm currently in the Climate Change and Society Master's Program at NC State. And one of the things I'm really looking forward to contributing to our office in the future is really digging into some social aspects of climate change and resiliency planning. Because again, these are not happening in bubbles, these plans. People are affected, and I think it's important to know how people are affected. And again, with more research comes more questions, and that leads to more research. So there are plenty of ways that we're growing and actively trying to move forward through this crisis. A lot of questions that we get are, how can we get involved with climate, whether that's the office itself or in your communities, really, and I'm glad that this was mentioned earlier, vote. And it seems like a simple thing to do, but it's incredibly important. That vote411.org, highly recommend checking that out. There are other resources, there are plenty of them, but I'm going to plug the vote411.org. There are also other ways to contribute by seeking out community science efforts. Even if they don't seem directly related to climate, they can be. And I'm going to fill you in on an example of that here shortly. So the first one is COCORAS. That's the one I mentioned earlier, the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. It's essentially reporting rain gauge readings throughout the state and throughout the nation, really. I'm focusing more on North Carolina right now, but this program is throughout the nation. And we have a lot of weather stations throughout the state, 43 to be exact in our office. But there are a lot of pockets, a lot of empty pockets, and a lot of people live there. not only is that an opportunity for research, but it's also important to note that people are being affected even where we don't have weather stations. So the more information, the more data points we have, the better off everyone will be. So I highly recommend CocoRAS. Another one that I really enjoy and I use almost on a daily basis is iNaturalist. There are apps in the Apple Store and Google Play Store, but there's also a website, iNaturalist.com. .org. But when I started using this, I really was just interested. I was out and about and taking pictures of things I saw on hikes, things like that. But I attended a talk recently that said that researchers are actually using this data to identify migration patterns of insects, animals, and even plants. And while that's not always based on the changing climate, those migration patterns, we're starting to notice that a lot of them are. So it's an incredibly useful and very interesting and fun to use community science effort that's going on. When I was teaching, I always told my students, find something that you are passionate about and find something that you really care deeply about. And chances are you're going to be able to find a community science project about something that really interests you. So I highly recommend everyone do that for the science, but also because it's a lot of fun. So one thing that one bank that of community science that I've looked into is the National Geographic Bank of Science Projects. If you look up in Google citizen science projects, you'll come up with a lot of different potential ones that might interest you. And I've been using community science. I prefer public science or community science efforts. Terminology is catching up, but if you Google citizen science, you'll also see quite a few things pop up. If you'd like more information about us, the office itself, or anything that I've mentioned, I know that there will be quite a few links that I have mentioned that will be sent out, but also I encourage you to visit our website, climate.ncsu.edu. There's a lot of great information there, and we're actually transitioning to a new website by the beginning of next year is the timeline that we're looking at. And we're developing more tools. We are revamping education pages, having a lot of different information about our EcoNet weather network. So I encourage you to take a look at that soon, and then also come back in a few months and see how we've grown. And that does it for me. I'm really excited to hear from Isa, and thank you all for being here tonight. I really appreciate it.
Hi, it is such an honor to be here. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for inviting me. I feel so honored. I'm so ready to share this wonderful information with you guys. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Perfect. Okay, so my name is Isa Deering, and as Diane said, I am a student at Howard University. I'm actually a third-year student. I went to an early college high school program that I just graduated from in 2020, and now I am a junior environmental studies and history major. I'm from Durham, and as Diane mentioned, I'm the co-founder of the Durham Youth Climate Justice Initiative, which seeks to set an intentional space for young people of color in climate justice. And interestingly enough, my background is in racial equity, but I'm really interested in kind of what Cam mentioned too, the intersectionalities between climate science and racial inequity. So let's get started. So if there's one thing that I want you to take away from this presentation, is that disasters do not strike in a vacuum. So what does that mean? As we know, like disasters, they don't discriminate, but their long-term impacts are disproportionately felt by communities that are historically vulnerable. So disasters strike in the historical context that we're in. we know that the United States is a historically racist and classist society. So natural disasters like COVID-19 naturally disproportionately impact Black and brown folks. And as I mentioned, natural disasters exacerbate wealth and racial inequality. And these are some of the questions that I like to consider when I see all of these like hurricanes, tornadoes, other natural disasters on television. Like, who has the resources to evacuate? And what does that mean, right? Who has the greatest amount of savings? Because obviously your amount of savings, your income, your ability to relocate for however long the disaster may occur, obviously that affects who is able to transport themselves safely out of the disaster zone, who has the resources to repair their households or other precious items after a disaster. And this largely goes into question 4 about FEMA and where disaster relief comes from, because FEMA is largely built on the restoration of private property, which is, interestingly enough, very inequitable because white home ownership in the United States occurs in much larger rates than any other community. So obviously it's a lot easier for white homeowners to receive disaster relief as opposed to Black homeowners who may lose their title to the house in a natural disaster, or they may have inherited the house informally through without a transfer of deed, which happens in a lot of common occurrences. Another question I like to think of is, what is the impact on one's livelihood? And especially as it pertains to North Carolina as a large agrarian society, when we see hurricanes kind of batter our coastlines, that obviously affects the agriculture that can be grown here. And when your crops get flooded, there's really not much you can do to repair that for the season, destroying one's livelihood for that year. So a great example of this is Hurricane Florence in 2018 that kind of battered the eastern coast of North Carolina. We saw that it flooded the Lumbee River, impacting Lumberton and Goldsboro, largely African-American cities. Disproportionately, we know that these cities are largely composed of, or they are floodplains. Just naturally, storms are going to disproportionately impact floodplains anyway, and they're occupied by low-income communities of color because that's the land that they can afford. And then we see FEMA on top of that not providing the same level of disaster relief as nearby white communities. We see that these natural disasters like Hurricane Florence exacerbate some of the same societal systems that the United States has had since its founding. So those are some of the really interesting ways that climate intersects with race and class. Also, I want to talk about the future. So it's predicted that the Earth could experience a 1.5, and that's a very low guess, to a 7-degree temperature rise by 2100. 7-degree rise is pretty extreme. That's if we continue with business as usual. And 1.5 degree, that's if we started following the Paris Climate Accords tomorrow. So you can kind of see that varying degree of temperature rise and what does that mean for intensity. A 7-degree temperature rise would obviously create an inhabitable planet. So all life on Earth would essentially go extinct if we did continue with business as usual. So what does this mean for younger generations and people like myself? So I kind of want to take you guys into a world in 2050. So what does it look like? That means that I'm going to be 48 years old. I'm 18 right now, so that's 30 years from now. Some of the predictions are that northern cities are going to experience some of the similar weather patterns to southern cities. And that essentially means that we're going to experience more intense seasonal shifts. And for North Carolina, I'm sure you went outside this summer and experienced like 95 to 100-degree weather days. And interestingly enough, the largest mortality rate of any natural disaster is actually heat stroke. People die more often due to heat stroke than any other natural disaster in the United States. So people are going to experience more cases of hypothermia and heat stroke kind of with this more intense seasonal shift. And referring to what I kind of presented on earlier, it will affect vulnerable communities more. We're also going to see more intense storms. And I know you guys have been seeing this throughout the past 10 years. We are constantly getting higher category hurricanes. We're seeing more flooding events, more California wildfires almost every year. And we cannot continue to mitigate these disasters. We have to actually start taking preventative measures so these disasters do not happen. We're also going to experience higher sea level rise. It's projected to be more than 1 foot. In 2045, that means that the Outer Banks of North Carolina, where my mom grew up, would be underwater. And because Miami would most likely also be partially underwater, parts of New York would be underwater, this is going to create climate refugees worldwide. So these are some of the situations that younger people are going to have to face because of the climate crisis. We're interestingly watching Thwaites Glacier in Antarctica in one of my classes specifically, so I thought it was natural to mention it here too. It's about the size of Great Britain, and it retreats at a half mile per year. One of the largest contributors to the ocean level rising is the Thwaites Glacier. It melts from below, so interestingly enough, that allows the glacier to melt faster because it's losing its structure. And if Thwaites Glacier melted entirely, which is predicted to happen sooner rather than later, if we continue with business as usual, a 2 to 3 meter rise is predicted. So just to keep in the back of your mind as I continue presenting and asking your questions about what are young people gonna face. I also want to talk about COVID-19 and climate change and how environmental epidemiology plays into all of the things that I just mentioned. So as if climate change couldn't get any scarier, this is the issue that I particularly fear the most. While COVID-19 was not caused by climate change directly, because humans continue to engage in deforestation efforts and continue to get closer to wildlife, because by deforestation, you are destroying the habitat of wildlife. So bringing human beings closer to wildlife is going to allow for the transmission of viruses and bacteria. Like COVID-19, it's predicted that COVID-19 originated in bats and transferred over to humans in Wuhan, China. So we're going to see the introduction of more novel viruses because they're going to be closer in proximity to us. So we're looking for zoonotic viruses. We're also looking at the issue of melting ice. And this is one of the more scarier issues for me. As the sea ice melts, as permafrost melts in the Siberian and in higher latitudes of Canada, there's all kinds of organic matter, bacteria, and viruses in the ice from centuries ago. And interestingly enough, this picture was taken from the Siberian taiga, where a reindeer carcass that was embedded in the permafrost long ago that actually had anthrax was discovered, and a herd of reindeer actually kind of preyed upon the carcass and got anthrax. And actually, because there was a human population nearby in that Siberian taiga, the anthrax jumped from reindeer to human beings. So that's kind of a case of a zoonotic virus reaching human beings because of the devastating effects of climate change. And I know this all sounds really scary, and I like to be optimistic. And I know that human beings, young people, we have the tools, we have the energy, we can fight this. And the League of Women Voters obviously has a lot of power you guys can advocate for policies that will better reflect our priorities. And as Diane mentioned earlier, we can vote. We can vote for politicians that will commit to equitable policy, meaning not just non-racist, but explicitly anti-racist. We can fight for better disaster relief efforts. And interestingly enough, in disaster management, there is an overrepresentation of white people, which is why it's predicted that disaster management is so inequitable. So there's many things that we can advocate for here. We can also advocate for the divestment from fossil fuels, which is considered to be the driver of climate change. It releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, increasing the amount of re-radiated heat that the Earth keeps inside its atmosphere, thereby melting the ice. So we should and we must invest in renewable energy so we can vote and advocate for policies that reflect these priorities. We also, as the League of Women Voters has a lot of power in North Carolina, you guys have the power to center the voices of frontline communities, people who may not be able to access those in power otherwise. You guys are a direct line to power. Politicians listen to you and they want to hear what you have to say, but they might not go to the community of Goldsboro after Hurricane Florence hit. They may not go to Lumberton, the primarily African-American communities that are actually facing these disasters. It's important to make activism accessible in this way because, in essence, it is. So you can also plant a tree with Trees Durham. I forgot to mention earlier, I believe it was mentioned in my introduction though, that I'm the Planning, Planting, and Environmental Justice Coordinator at Trees Durham. And we work to build a sustainable, healthy, and socially just urban forest in Durham, North Carolina. And some of the ways we do that is we directly give away trees and plant trees in formerly redlined communities. That means communities that were harmed by racist housing policy in the Jim Crow era of the South. So by coming out and volunteering with us, I believe I sent Diane the link, so please check that out if you're interested. You can also start a garden and reduce your consumption of some plastic goods, which individually is a great contribution in the climate justice efforts. And I believe that is the conclusion of my presentation. I was so honored to be able to present this information, and I look forward to hearing your questions and your comments. So I will stop sharing.
Sorry. So sorry, that took me too long. So thank you so much, Isa and Cam, both. That was so helpful. And I love all the links, which we will send you, or they will be posted for you. We also we'll have a recording on our YouTube channel. So go to those links, take action. And now I'd like to open it up for a little bit of discussion. So if you have any more questions, please go ahead and put them in the Q&A, and I'm going to send it over to Cheryl. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. That was just fascinating listening to you, and I'm so hopeful about the younger generation taking a hand of climate change and getting things done. We do have a few questions here in the question and answer box. So let me start with this. Was wondering what kind of working relationship, if any, the State Climate Office has with the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality.
Right, I think by definition, I'll take that one. So I can't point to a specific project or tool or things of the sort. Again, I started in February. It's a fairly small office, but our work reaches out into a lot of different areas. I will say though, I would be shocked if we did not have a working relationship with Department of Environmental Quality. So I apologize, I can't be more specific than that. I know I've heard the that department thrown around a few times in the office itself, but I can't point to anything specifically. I know that we cite some of their work and they cite some of ours. I do know that for a fact, but beyond that, again, I'd be shocked if we didn't work more closely than that.
Thank you, Cam. Let's see. The next question, Cam, I think this one would be for you also. Do you use NOAA observers as well, NOAA?
Yes, we do. So we don't collect their data or maintain their stations or anything like that. However, we do have access to a lot of their data, and we include that on our website on the maps that we have for current weather and things like that. But we use it's the AWAS, it's the Automated Airport Weather Station, and that is a NOAA network. And we also use the National Data Bowie Center, so some oceanic temperatures and conditions. Again, we don't do any maintenance or have much more than access to the data, but that relationship does exist.
Oh, would you please spell CocoRoz?
I would be happy to. I apologize that I didn't do that earlier. So whoever asked the question, Carol, you nailed it. You got the correct spelling. It is CoCorahs.org if you would like to visit the website directly. So yeah, great question, and I apologize I didn't answer that during the discussion.
This one I think would be for Isa. Would you please provide a little more description of Trees Durham? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So Trees Durham, so we work to build a sustainable, healthy, and socially just urban forest in Durham. We do that mainly through tree giveaways, tree plantings, educational sessions, and advocacy with other organizations. So the tree giveaways and tree plantings, because Durham historically has not allocated what we would consider a healthy amount of trees to formerly redlined communities. These are primarily communities of color and low-income communities. We target community organizations that specifically work in these neighborhoods. We also do tree giveaways with individuals. We also do tree plantings directly in their neighborhoods, working in tandem with the community. We also do advocacy with different community organizations, like in front of the Durham Planning Commission. So we combat gentrification efforts. We ensure that environmental equity is instilled in all developing plans going forward. And educational sessions, that just means we go to Durham Public Schools and talk about the racial history of trees. So we try to incorporate some of that STEM, some of that humanities. It's a fun time.
Is that something, just adding to that question, is that something that you have citizens helping with? I mean, is this all organized from like grassroots?
So Trees Durham is a nonprofit. So okay. we enlist volunteers, just whoever is interested in tree planting and usually we just do volunteers for tree plantings and tree giveaways. But in the community, with the community organizations that we directly work with, we do that through relationship and coalition building. So yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Let's see. I said, do you connect with Stand Up for Racial Justice?
I don't.
Yes, you are.
Oh, I was gonna say, I don't believe I am connected with Stand Up for Racial Justice. So I will look into that, or maybe I could drop my email, or I can send my email to Diane, or Diane has my email. So maybe she could share it with everyone who's here today. If you're interested in contacting me, I'd love to hear more.
Wonderful, thank you. What trees are recommended for the sandy soil of Southport coastal area?
Okay, yeah, I can take that one. So sandy soil, I would obviously recommend trees that are native to Durham, or sorry, North Carolina. I would recommend red maple trees, can live in pretty much anything. And Cam, I don't know if you can back me up here. Red maples, I would do southern magnolias. Coastal red cedars are also really good. And loblolly pines, of course, the state tree. And all of those are really good in, or they're really resilient trees. So they can prosper well in soil that may not be as fertile.
Thank you. Let's see. This may be a question that is sort of a general type question. It's so discouraging to hear that markets for recyclables are disappearing. Locally, do you know what is happening to the items we recycle? Isa or Cam, do you have any knowledge of that?
I can speak a little bit on behalf of what's happening in Durham. I know most of our recycling ends up naturally in the landfill because they do not have the infrastructure to process all of that recycling. They also don't have people that are they're buying the recycling. The whole point of recycling is that someone has to buy all of that plastic. Once it's been sorted, there's no buyers, there's not enough infrastructure. So I don't remember the percentage, so I don't want to give you any inaccurate numbers, but I know that a majority of our recycling ends up in the trash or in the landfill.
Mm-hmm.
I'll add to that a little piece. Not anything I'm an expert at, so take what I'm saying with a grain of salt. But I have seen stories recently of people in the community taking over the recycling responsibilities that maybe shouldn't fall on the community entirely. But it's really encouraging to see people. I mean, I saw a story about people kind of renting out space to expand their. I think they focused on glass recycling. But to expand that process. So it is encouraging, not just with recycling, but with a lot of issues, to see communities take responsibility and take action. But I can't say for sure what's going on as far as local government's concerned with the recycling.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. There was one back here I wanted to come back to. I have a lot of questions here. It's wonderful to see so many. It's hard to read them all quickly and pick out something. This one came in. Could you comment on the painful dilemma about rebuilding or not again and again occurring with flooding of historic Princeville by Hurricanes Matthew and Florence? This treasured historical city continues to have tragedy pile on. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I can comment on that, and Cam, please jump in whenever. I believe Princeville, north of Wilmington, and that's one of the oldest African American cities in the nation. I remember after Hurricane Florence, seeing these headlines about how Princeville still hadn't received their electricity turned on after the storm, even though most of Wilmington already had their lights on. I remember seeing that, obviously FEMA hadn't or denied a lot of their requests for loans and grants to help rebuild and restore some of their historical properties. So yeah, I kind of speaking to the presentation, I have seen kind of what's happening in Princeville and how that just plays into the larger narrative around racial disparity and natural disasters.
Thank you.
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
I can't, again, specifically, I can't necessarily speak to Princeville, but if we're seeing this at a lot of different locations, not just throughout the United States, but around the world. And I think people like us that know that this is an issue, a lot of times, and I'm very guilty of this, I think of only long-term solutions as to how can we help when those timelines are coming along 10, 20 years down the road. But that's not when people need help. People need help now and today. So I think that's a very important thing to consider, and something that I've been trying to work on myself is how can we do both? How can we come up with short-term solutions to help people now while also transitioning into longer-term solutions? And there are a lot of great minds at work with this, especially as it has to do with coastal communities, building seawalls like we have in the past, but also transitioning over to living barrier reefs like made of oysters and things like that, that will build themselves up even when the sea is rising. So there are a lot of really interesting solutions to some of these problems, but I think we need to focus on how do we deal with both long-term and short-term.
Sorry, this person said, I've lived in North Carolina since the late 1970s and have definitely noticed changes in growing seasons, birds I see, and when they migrate, nest, etc. Even small things like when azaleas and dogwoods bloom, when leaves change, etc. Is there a site where such changes have been tracked formally via narrative reports, measurements, etc.? I'm wondering if they're thinking of maybe something that citizen scientists would also contribute to that would give a bigger picture.
I think you're on mute still.
I was just gonna say, yeah, I am not aware of any websites that track that, so Cam.
I'd have to go with what I had mentioned earlier with the iNaturalist. I don't know specifically what organizations might use that information, only that it is used for those. I've listened to talks that mention studies of bird migrations and plant migrations as well, not just northward, but also elevation, moving up mountains and things like that. As those mountains get warmer, higher up in elevation. So it's not something that I've seen they track this for this long and this is what's happening. But there are multiple examples that I've come across in my reading.
Online shopping creates a huge demand for cardboard. Are you aware of requirements for producers of cardboard to replant trees?
If I was aware, I would start shopping at Amazon again, because I know Amazon is one of the most wasteful when it comes to packing or just packing materials. You have to throw all of that away, even the cardboard box, because the ink on the cardboard box is not recyclable. So I am not aware of any requirements, any sort of accountability, honestly, that these companies have like hold their standards to when it comes to recycling.
Right.
I'm glad you mentioned accountability. I think that until, and this kind of goes back to the recycling question, until these companies can be held accountable and really kind of offset what they're doing, unfortunately, I think the onus is on us as consumers to really use our money in a way that we feel good about, and that we kind of, we control with our wallet who succeeds. And I think that that's what we can do individually while also pushing for larger structural change.
Piggybacking on that, here's another question. The Citizens Climate Lobby is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization supporting a bipartisan bill that was introduced into Congress to put a fee on fossil fuels. This fee would be collected and returned to individual households as a dividend. Are you aware of any research on carbon fee and dividend as an effective solution to reducing fossil fuel emissions to stop climate change? And this is HR 763 and its Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. Are either of you familiar with any research on carbon fee and dividend as an effective solution to reducing fossil fuel emissions?
I know that carbon taxing was and carbon caps were something that was really talked about a few years ago. Now, the people who are in the companies that are using the most and pumping the most carbon into the atmosphere are usually the ones that don't mind paying for the fee because they can afford it. I think it's a good way to kind of push industry in the right direction. However, I based on the science strictly, there's really not a transition period anymore. If we would have started a few decades ago, that might have been a viable and a great way to start. But the more we talk about it, the less action we take. And I think the time has come where, you know, I would love to see that those dividends that are passed out to the community based on those maybe taxes that have been not necessarily paid, at least not to the degree that, you know, citizens are taxed, treating companies and kind of equally when it comes to that would really offset a lot of those costs. So I don't have a great answer, but I know that it's been something that has been pushed around in the past. I think it's a little too far gone to have a transitional fossil fuel period, even natural gas, but I understand that that's being seen as a transition now too.
Can I piggyback off of that? Because
Sure, absolutely.
okay, I was gonna say, yeah, I completely agree. I think that a carbon tax in its intent, it's supposed to dissuade corporations from releasing all of this carbon into the atmosphere, but because they have the money, they're gonna release it anyway. And as Cam mentioned, like, where is this money really going? And that also, like, you can't really put a price on people's health because these corporations, these power plants are located oftentimes more than not in communities of color and more vulnerable communities. And they may not be seeing that dividend. And even if they are, is that going to pay for your lung cancer treatment? You know, I think a carbon tax would be, it's not sustainable in the long term. And though it would have been an effective measure maybe years ago, we're too far gone for that. We need to make some action happen now.
And if you don't mind, I do want to add one more thing to what Isa said.
Okay. Sure, certainly.
Just talking about how it affects people, because I think that's what a lot of the conversation is missing. Some of us might have heard the term, they're the wrong side of the railroad tracks. A lot of times railroad tracks ran north and south, and the wrong side of the railroad tracks were on the east side, because that's when you have industry, and the way that North American winds work is that they're blowing from the west to the east. So if you're on the east side of those railroad tracks, you're on the east side of the industries that are pumping out all that stuff. And that wind is just carrying it right to your community. So this is a bigger issue than well, we can just give some money to the people that that we would be getting from these taxes. We really have to address a lot of these issues at the foundation.
Thank you both. Those are excellent explanations, and I can tell heartfelt, heartfelt feelings. This one piggybacks on that last idea about how this affects people. Is there anyone looking at how to deal with climate refugees here in North Carolina?
Well, based on our past record of dealing with war refugees, I think that there's a lot we can learn from the action or lack thereof in the past. I know that the Department of Defense has been looking into this a lot. The U.S. military, this is a huge national security issue that is coming up and trying to be dealt with. So they're trying to deal with it already. It's coming. It's just a matter of time, and not much of it is left. So yes, there are organizations looking into it, but there can always be more.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I was just saying, I was just going to ask you if you had something to add to that.
Absolutely, yeah. And the conversation around migration in general has always had a peculiar historical context when it comes to the United States. I am not familiar with anyone looking to deal with climate refugees now. I know that there is some internal migration happening. People are moving to North Carolina, to the Piedmont region in particular, from places like California, Louisiana, Texas, who are being hit with some of these natural disasters, these wildfires and hurricanes. Internationally, there's obviously been some interesting policy over the past 4 years regarding who is allowed to migrate to the United States. And it is my hope that in the future, we will cherish human life and kind of recognize that the United States is the greatest contributor to global warming per capita. So we should feel some sort of ethical responsibility to accept climate refugees from other countries, because we're most likely helping to fuel those disasters. So I will be working towards that in my studies and my future career. So thank you for asking that.
And I think we have two last questions. How will we change the perception that that working an action for climate action is prohibitively expensive?
Oh, that's such a great question. I would say climate inaction is a lot more expensive in the long run, and it will be the young people that are going to end up paying for it if we don't start doing something now. And while climate action, and I'm assuming we're talking about investing in renewable energy, has a very heavy sticker price. And when we're talking about sustainability in the long term, it's actually a lot cheaper in the long term to install solar panels and put up wind turbines rather than fracking and running oil pipelines through eastern North Carolina, which was luckily shut down by Governor Cooper. Cam, any thoughts?
Cam, I think she's tossing to you.
There. So I apologize. I was thinking like a little bit deeper about what you were saying, Isa. Could you just remind me of the initial question? Just bring me back a little bit.
How do do we change the perception that acting against climate change or acting, in favor of population is being prohibitively expensive?
I like what you said there at the end, is acting in favor of population, because that's really how things should be looked at. And I know that's the price, the money, that's what it's all about. So if we just talk about the money and think about the money, look at Louisiana right now. And I know it's difficult to put yourself in the shoes of someone else a lot of times. And that's why I think a lot of times when younger people are saying, my generation is going to have to deal with this, older generations and people that are making these decisions are unable to put themselves in the shoes of the younger people who are terrified. Same thing goes with knowing that there are climate disasters happening right now that are having ridiculous price tags attached to them. And we're seeing them become more and more common, unfortunately. So I think it's framing it in a way, not to put a price tag on it, but to bring people's awareness that this is going to affect everyone. North Carolina, people are moving to North Carolina thinking like, oh, I'm going to get away from it all. I'm going to move to North Carolina. And that's simply not going to be the case forever. While it's a little more difficult to see now, we're seeing warming, obviously with the climate change, but we're also seeing wetter seasons, and not necessarily that we're having more rain events, but our rain events are much more drastic and they're dropping a lot more water. And this is a lot of times happening after a period of drought. So the water that we're getting not just floods neighborhoods and communities, but the agriculture industry that's growing our food is not going to be able to have the resources to grow our food, because yeah, plants need water and they're going to get it, but they don't need water all at once. So really kind of framing it in a way that will make it relevant to people's lives and livelihoods, I think is the only way that we're going to approach this question. And I would hate for it to be people don't understand the impact until it happens to them, because that's how a lot of things are happening. I mean, we can make it analogous to COVID, where as soon as people, well, it happened to me now, so I'm going to take this seriously. We can't wait for that, because by the time we have enough people to get on board, it's going to be too late. So I think that's why younger people are so focused on this problem and solving.
Well, I just would like to tell you that a comment came in to both of you to say, I hope you wonderful young people will consider running for office. We need you. So the two of you who are saying vote. So here's your first votes. And I think we can close with this one, because it goes back to the climate refugees, but it's more close to home. And it says, how about just our citizens who will need to move? How are we going to deal with them? And both of you have talked about this. So if you would revisit that as something a little closer to home and not in the abstract.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead, Isa.
Oh, no, go ahead. It's all good.
All right, I'll let you finish it up for us. So citizens needing to move. Now, I just want to start out by saying that's a pretty privileged way to look at things, because a lot of people cannot move. They don't have the option, the finances. But getting to the question of citizens that do need to move, I don't want to look at it as dealing with. North Carolina has plenty of land and plenty of space. Part of my job entails driving all over the state, and there is plenty of state to go around. But one of the things that I've been looking into a lot more is a lot of times we hear about population rise and how it's an unsustainable population, and that's simply not true. we just don't use our land in a way that, one, can provide for our communities, but two, restores the natural way of the landscape, which is a huge part of being resilient. I know that Isa was saying a lot, was talking about different trees that are incredibly resilient. That doesn't just help take CO2 out of the atmosphere, that helps keep the ground where it's supposed to be. That helps bring nutrients and bring life back to that area. And we don't know all of the different tendrils of climate change that everything affects everything. Everything's connected. So learning to live a little more sustainably, whether it's using some of your yard space for gardening, whether it's, I want to get back to the moving aspect because that was the original question, but I think running away from the problem is a big issue as to why it's difficult to deal with, because people, well, if it gets bad here, I'll just head to Canada. It'll probably still be cool there. And it's just kind of pushes the problem down the road for someone else to deal with. So really, personally, I think about more of a sustainable effort. The policy aspect of things gets a lot more complex, and I don't feel that I'm qualified to discuss the policy aspect of things, but that's what I'm trying to learn about in the master's program. So I'll talk to you in a year or two and
In a year.
revisit that question.
That'll be great. That'll be great. Isa, what do you have on
Yeah.
that comment?
Yeah, along the same lines, I definitely agree with Cam that just the option to move is a very privileged ability to have. And we've already seen people moving out of our state and across our state into the Piedmont and mountainous Charlotte region because of these coastal events. And what we need to do is offer them relocation assistance. And it should be FEMA that does that. And oftentimes with communities of color and low-income vulnerable communities, that assistance is not offered. So I'd like to see that expanded in the coming years when hopefully I am tackling environmental policy issues in a master's program. I would also, I would also like to see, because I know, moving definitely feels like an out for me too. Like, we're just gonna kind of just give up on this area of land. It's going underwater, or there's too extreme flooding events or too extreme wildfires to live here. But if we start putting in the resources now and start taking some of these preventative measures, like planting trees, like reducing our carbon emissions, like reducing our consumptions of plastic, this won't be an issue for people like me who are 18 and just want to see my grandkids, be able to swim in clean water and breathe clean air.
Thank you, Isa. Thank you both. You're really, it was great, Cam, that you hopped in here and took over at the last minute, and you did a beautiful job. And Isa, we have been so looking forward to hearing from you. You've inspired us and you've motivated all of us. Good luck to you. We'll look forward to having you both with us again soon, I hope. Want to thank everyone this evening. This webinar was recorded and we will be posting it on our League of Women Voters YouTube channel within a few days. Don't miss our next Timely Topics presentation on November the 19th, when our guest will be Lorena McDowell, Director, Wake Housing Affordability and Community Revitalization, who will speak about county efforts for affordable housing. And register now on our website. I want to thank you all for attending this evening. Please take care, and thank you for the great questions.